Hi, good evening. My name is Karim Zaman. I'm the CEO of Fifth Tribe. We're a digital agency based here out of our nation's capital. And I want to welcome you to episode 1 of the Campfire YouTube live Q&A with our special guest tonight, Professor Marc Steren.
Hello.
Say hi, Mark, to the lovely people on the internet.
Excited to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Great. So tonight's topic is going to be how to start a startup. I met Professor Steren through the Georgetown University Summer Launch Program, and I've been mentoring startups for several years. And when I went through that program, even as a mentor, I was blown away, to say the least. And I was really impressed with the model of the program and how advanced students had become in just about 6 weeks. And I thought it was very important for those people that are interested in creating a startup or building or launching a startup to be exposed to this methodology. There's existing methodologies like Lean Startup or Business Model Canvas, and Marc has actually created his own methodology, and he's actually written a book about it, which we'll talk about tonight. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and tell people a little bit about yourself. We can go ahead and get started with our live Q&A. So awesome. Marc, let's start with number 1, I guess, is tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, because right now you're an adjunct professor at University of Delaware. You're teaching entrepreneurship at a high school. You're running the summer launch program at Georgetown University. I believe you've had 6 startups. You're on your 2nd book. So I just want you to tell us in your own words about your story.
Sure. I think my parents had dreams of me becoming an attorney. I went to University of Pennsylvania. I learned rather quickly that I was not such a great attorney, but I love the experience. Law school is fantastic, but about 6 months into my first job at a law school, a friend of mine noticed that there was a problem with the whole ticket space. This is in the early 90s. So we, of course, did what all great entrepreneurs do, immediately quit our jobs, went 6 months without a salary, and we had our first startup, which was great. We ended up selling that to another Nokia company, and we were really off and running.
Great. So that was company number 1, right?
It was.
So what about the other companies?
So that we've had a mix of landscaping, real estate. My latest venture was actually restaurants. We actually franchised, and it was more of a real estate play, but we franchised a bunch of Qdoba Mexican grills, still own much of the real estate. And now we're on startup number 6,
great,
which is sustainable umbrellas, which is always fun.
And then how did you get into education? So you've been an entrepreneur. I know your schedule was really intense. I think you were telling me some of your daily routines. And then you're also teaching, I think, at 2 universities and a high school. Yeah. So how does that work out?
So, it's funny. After 2012, we sold our last company. And I told my wife we were going to settle down, relax for a couple of years, and write books and teach at college. And I got wind that my old high school was looking for an entrepreneurship program. And I said, high school students can't do this. It's not for them. But I spent about 8 hours really at a remarkable school, Bullis in Potomac, Maryland. And after spending that amount of time with the staff and the headmaster, it was apparent that I really found a home. And so that's kind of where I'm based out of. I teach 1 course there. I'm an entrepreneur resident at Georgetown University and run their summer launch program, and as you indicated, an adjunct at Delaware. But I love education. There is so much I've learned over these last 5 years from the students, great mentors like yourself, far exceeds what I've learned in business. So it's been a great experience.
That's great. That's great. I mean, there's just so much stuff we could talk about here. Tell me a little bit about some of the accomplishments of your students as well, because I mean, your biography is impressive by itself, but your students that have gone through your programs, they've done pretty amazing things. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's so cool to watch them go through the process, right? So I've had one team, actually it was Suniva. They were at a Georgetown University launch program. They're anyone who hasn't had their product, fantastic product. It's a cold coffee that was developed at a student's dorm room. And what he noticed is he was exhausted for basketball practice, just exhausted, and all the sugar drinks and Starbucks, Frappuccinos. And so what they did is they came up with their own product with very little sugar. In fact, no sugar, stevia. And now they're in Wegmans, they're in Whole Foods, they were on Shark Tank. They're just doing fabulous work. But I've had high school students come up with their own ideas. One was Kenga Trash and Energy Systems. I'm sure you've been to the stadium, and then you throw the peanuts on the floor, the beer on the floor, And what they did is they developed a bag, they patented a bag that goes underneath your seat.
Mm-hmm.
So in lieu of throwing that trash on the floor,
Wow.
you put it in your seat. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And they continued all the senior year through Babson. Another one of my high school students receives grants at Vanderbilt it's an academic management tool.
Mm-hmm.
Just fabulous kids.
That's great. I mean, you mentioned Shark Tank. So your students, these are high school students, college students?
Mix. So some of the students have gone on Shark Tank, Techstars in London. Other students have just from high school to college just received grants, continue on their own products and developed the foundation at Bullis and really just grew at the university, or they took their concept they started in high school and really just took off with it.
That's incredible.
It's
so
fun.
How does that make you feel as a teacher to see your students go on and do these things?
It's great, but sometimes we take too much credit. To be honest, they have to do the work. This is the one class, whether it's MBA students we have in our summer launch program or high school students that are 18 years old, we just give them the framework. We give them this methodology, and if they don't follow that methodology and they don't really validate that consumers have this need, it's meaningless. It's the one course that it doesn't matter what I say. You can get an A+, but if I'm the only consumer that wants the product, it's a dud.
So let's talk a little about this process. And you've written about this in one of your books, which is called A Student's Guide to Entrepreneurship. So what impressed me a lot about the Summer Launch Program was, first of all, it's a 6-week program. It's based out of the Georgetown University Venture Lab in the WeWork White House. And there's about maybe how many students would you say are in that program?
So there's anywhere from 12 to 15 teams. So sometimes they're individual teams and sometimes they're teams of 2 to 3 members.
And it was incredible because the process, whenever we were going through it, I was like, I really wish I had this in high school and college. When we first started Fifth Tribe, we were a product company and we were making iPad mobile sales applications. And then through the process, we went through sort of like a lean startup methodology or business model canvas, but we did it in a kind of the wrong way. We asked all these things you talk about in the program, like don't ask leading questions, do customer discovery. Could you give a brief overview of this process? Because I think for young people starting a business, the things that you tell them not to focus on, like don't focus on the logo, don't focus on the legal, don't focus on the IP, focus on customer interviews and customer discovery. And to me, that was I really appreciated you saying that because I wish somebody had mentored me when we first started off. So let's talk a little about that process.
Sure. If you think of it this way, entrepreneurs, the best entrepreneurs are the biggest givers, right? Because they're satisfied, not needs for themselves. They're looking to satisfy needs for the consumer. And if you think of it that way, that approach, you're really on your way. So the first step at any of this journey, anything that we discuss is identifying problems, and not just problems that are minor headaches, right? It's got to be a migraine where the consumer is dying for some sort of solution.
Can you explain what you mean by migraine?
Yeah. So,
because you had the term hair on fire.
Yeah.
And I thought that was great because, the challenges that you're solving for, it can't just be sort of a nice to have. It has to be irresistible, we must have. And this language that you use, I remember when I first saw it, I was like, what is this terminology? But then when you go through the process, you're like, this is a perfect description of what entrepreneurship is. So talk about these terms.
Sure. There's 2 educators I have to mention, Steve Blank out of Stanford University and Ash Maurya, who is really one of the best entrepreneurship books I ever read. It's called Running Lean. And they discuss the need for the consumer to really, in order for them to switch, right? You're brand loyal. You use the same products for year to year. You develop these habits, consumer habits. The only way they're going to switch to your brand is they have such a deep problem. We discussed hair on fire, this Blank's term, where they're so jazzed that they're so in need of a solution that they're like, sign me up. Where can I get what you're describing? Give me some more of your Kool-Aid. Or they're trying to fix it themselves. They're building ad hoc solutions to existing products. And if they're doing that man, they really want you to go and solve that for them. And that's the key. So again, with the first step, any step is love the problem. Just fall in love with the problem. And I think that's the key.
And then to build off of that, one of the things you mentioned was that they have this problem and they're attempting to solve it. And I think you used the term existing alternatives. So that's important because I think when people think of an existing alternative, they automatically assume it's another product and it could be something else. It could be using social media. It could be talking to people. So that was really important because what it did is I think it puts the entrepreneur is in the shoes of the customer and really get into like their psychology and see the world as they do. So could you talk a little bit about what's an existing alternative for these problems that they're facing?
That's a great point, right? So a lot of, you go to MBA and they'll do the Porter 5 Force analysis, they'll do a SWOT analysis, and they'll do, my competitors in Buenos Aires, and this is what they do. But what is the consumer actually doing now at this moment to solve that problem? That's what you want to focus on, and that's their existing alternative. We've seen more emails, more spreadsheets kill more companies than the most elaborate, elegant solution you'll ever see. So once you've determined what that existing alternative, you can anchor your solution to crush it, right? We want to be 3 times better than that existing alternative. But until you discover that, right, and really understand their usage, you're nowhere. You're just building for yourself and not for them.
And can you tell me, how do entrepreneurs find out these customer problems and their existing alternatives?
It's awesome. That's a great question. And if I had that answer, I'd be off on my beautiful island. I think what we do and what great entrepreneurs do is they really go through the qualitative component first, right? They interview consumers, they do open-ended interviews, and they really listen for past stories of problems, right? Nothing predictive, nothing, too futuristic. It is, what have you done in the past to solve the problem? Now, it's so much insight to what they do. We can understand their habits better, what they've considered, what options they've considered to purchase. We can really understand what they've done in the past, right? That's fact. They may do this or may they do something else, but we know for sure that this person did this in the past, and that's a good indicia what they'll do in the future.
And how many of these interviews did they do in the summer launch program?
A ton. We do close to 50 to 70 interviews, and I get that question all the time. How many interviews do I need to do? We make the students fill out a cohort chart and a commonality behaviors, all these different interviews. Once you discover the commonality, right, this is the particular problem for this segment, then you're onto something. That could be 10, that could be 150. But you can't move forward to the next gate until you discover that commonality. Again, we are trying to find a group, a segment that is dying to solve this problem, right? One person is not, unless that person will spend $100,000, that's not what you're looking for.
That's great. And I think one of the challenges, like even as an entrepreneur myself, is listening to customers and doing those interviews. And I remember the stories of some of the students doing these interviews. And what was remarkable was that it actually helped them do marketing and sales in a way, because I remember one of the students I was mentoring, he was running a digital agency. His name is Evan. And, he was, to be honest, I think it's a little intimidating to these customer interviews. Like, who do I go talk to? And the suggestion that the mentors came up with was like, oh, you're at Georgetown, just walk up the street and talk to businesses. What's incredible was that Evan actually did that. And he had so much confidence. Like, he's just a great guy. And he went up the street and introduced himself. And he's like, I'm a student at Georgetown. I'm part of the summer launch program. I'm trying to start a company. And I'd like to, he would go through the process. And he ended up finding a realtor. And by the end of the program, he actually got a paid customer. He got a contract. And that's just remarkable in 6 weeks that, going through the process produced tangible results for him. So I'm sure with a lot of, entrepreneurs, they're thinking, I got to focus on all this, the product and building it. And so where does that fit into this, this model of yours? So they're doing these customer interviews to understand the problem, existing alternatives. At what point do they start building this product that keeps them up at night?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, it's the framework. So Evan is a wonderful example. He was able to get a customer after week 3. We have another company. It was a great company called Trucker. That's a mobile application for food trucks. So if you want to order a food truck, she was able to obtain her ideal customer at the end of the course, at the end of the 6 weeks. It's that framework. It's that length of time going to interviews, finding the commonality, those that have a problem, working with the consumer to find the perfect solution, right, is awesome. And when I say perfect solution, I mean they're ready for a solution, right? Everything we build, I think Hoffman said, you're always going to laugh at your first iteration. True, but you should have some sense what the customer wants, right, and what they need. So that's a key component. So the framework gives you the ability to discover, right? It's really, I call it customer collaboration. A lot of people call it customer discovery. Discover, but in collaboration with that customer, you'll find something that they want, right? And that's the key. And then you'll know to build.
And then next step, there's 2 terms. There's a prototype, and then there's a minimal viable product. And I remember when you first talked about this really like clicked because people use them interchangeably. And so what's the difference between these two and in relation to this whole process?
It's a great question. And even among professors, business people, there's a lot of confusion between these terms. And I'll use the term that I like. Prototype is built for learning, right? Anything, a physical prototype, you're able to show the customer, you put metrics around it, and you can understand so much more because they have physical use of the product. An MVP, a minimum viable product, is when you build the smallest solution, right, for the customer, and the customer gives you a resource back. It can be data, it can be money, it can be anything that validates that the consumer wants it. Prototype doesn't do that. Prototype is just merely for learning. And that's the definition I go to, and I'll give Ash Maurya that credit. I spent time 3 days with him in the fall, and he's really turned me into that definition. Some people use MVP, prototype, high fidelity prototype. Listen, prototype's for learning. If you don't get anything back, it's just a prototype. Minimum viable product, they give it to the consumer gives you something back, it's an MVP.
That's great. I think it's important because what happens is sometimes entrepreneurs get so focused on the product that they may throw resources into it. They may throw money, they may take up a lot of time, they may get investors, they may put their own money into developing something, only to find out that they built a bridge to nowhere, that it was something that customers didn't want.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in the class you gave the example, I can't remember if it was you or Shai, was it the Segway? Or there was like somebody mentioned the Segway.
Yeah.
So that was a great example of like, there's all this hype and all this R&D behind it, and then it just like flopped, and then you gave other examples of successful uses of prototyping versus MVP. And I think you gave the example of Dropbox to really explain the difference. And could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So Reese, and I think this is where a lot of confusion. Eric Reese is really the founder of the Lean Startup, and he used Dropbox. What they did is they posted a video, and that they were able to get 75,000 signups, and he was able to get into the Y Combinator just based on this Dropbox video. I would argue now, just to simplify things, that's merely a prototype, right? They learn that there's a need, that people want this. In order for that to really be an MVP, customers, again, would have to give something back, not merely signing up. That's just the offer. And that's the distinction we make. Again, that's our definition, but it really resonates with students, with my mentors. There's no confusion. What's a prototype? What's an MVP? If you didn't get anything back, it's not an MVP. That's how we define it.
That's important because sometimes when you're building things, what ends up happening is like you confuse a tool for a product or a nonprofit for a business. And using that distinction between is it a prototype and an MVP, I think that's incredibly valuable because what it does is it explains that this is an exchange of value. And you may be doing this great, solution for something, but if it's not getting value in return, it's not an MVP.
Right.
So what happens after the MVP phase?
So MVP really is at the end of problem solution fit, right? There's a problem, you have a solution, and it fits because it's validated that you have an MVP. The next stage is you want to go to product market fit. Product market fit is when you have the ability to show 10x growth. That's product market fit, right? Product market fit is the customer is not only willing to pay it, but I have an entire segment that fits with this solution. That's stage 2. The third stage is scale. Man, I'm ready to rock. I can do it here. I can do it in Tel Aviv. I can do it in Pakistan. I am ready to roll. And those are the 3 stages all startups will go through. It doesn't matter if you're a mom and pop down here or you got the latest Fifth Tribe game on the roll. It's the same process. And again, that's what we love about it. The framework is the same. We had a big Georgetown University. We had this great meeting today where we discuss a potential customer to use our methodology to validate ideas without spending a lot of money, to validate that it really serves the beneficiary, and then they can eventually scale it. And it's the same.
That's right. And this approach is remarkable when you see it in action. These students are coming from all sorts of businesses. So one of the teams that I mentored was empanada, and it was like a frozen empanada solution or product, food product. And it was incredible because during the start of the program, she was already kind of in the process of building it out. And by the end of it, she was distributing food through Union Kitchen into grocery stores. And so you're seeing these ideas in action, like this little laboratory of companies that are coming out. So there's empanadas, there was Trucker, there's a digital agency. What was the most interesting company that you saw come out of Summer Launch?
So I've had some great companies. Can I mention Empanada for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
What she learned, which I thought was so cool, is you think, oh, it's Empanada, it's in the grocery store. I just put it in the shelves and it's going to sell. Mm-hmm. By the end of the course, she knew, is it the customer that comes home from dinner that's tired after work? Is it the customer that's looking for an afternoon snack? Is it the customer that has $10 in the pocket? What kind of customer buys her product and why? What are they trying to achieve by eating the empanada? Is it a snack? Is it dinner? Is it to keep my kids quiet so I can enjoy myself after a hard day of work? That information is so important for any company. So
what did she discover?
She discovered that it's a mix, right? That she had two different segments. That one, it's a snack, right? This great snack for kids coming home, and that busy business person at the end of the night, they're exhausted, pop it in, it's delicious. And she has such a great product. So, best products don't win, right? Facebook was the 12th social media site in its space. There was another site at the time being launched by Columbia, which was much better features. Best products don't win, right? You got to understand the customer needs. That's the winning formula. So what was the best summer launch program?
Yeah.
I can't pick one, but there were really some fabulous, just awesome. Trucker, I really enjoyed working with her. Hannah Williams, she was awesome. She understood that in order to really dominate the food truck space, she had to go what we call an influencer, pick the best food truck that can eventually, when they sign that person, the rest of them will fall. We had another great student, Sahaj, who came up with a dynamic pricing algorithm that restaurants can use to, during slow time, send out pushes for discounts, whatever it may be. But what Sahaj did so well, he understood what they're trying to achieve. The restaurant isn't necessarily trying to achieve 2 to 4 o'clock sales. They're trying to maximize sales, right? And what does that look like? And how does his algorithm help the restaurant? Not how does his restaurant help his algorithm? Mm-hmm. So that I thought was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think we're getting a few questions, and I want to make sure that I'm capturing them. So this is, let's start off at the top, and we'll go from there. Give me 1 second. So Rami Bobs asks, this is Rami, and I'm wondering, what is your most favorite startup of your 6 and why?
My favorite startup, probably ZebraPass, the first one. Mm-hmm. The RFID mobile ticketing and loyalty system, it was great. It was a lot of fun. Met some great people, had some wonderful investors. I think the excitement of it was just amazing. I would be in a box with Wayne Gretzky. I would have, Sue Spielberg was my marketing director, all these amazing people working with us and invested in us. But I will say that was probably my worst run startup.
Really?
It was my first. I really didn't know what I was doing. Mm-hmm. Probably had no business managing that amount of people. But I love the excitement of it. Mm-hmm. I just wish I knew then, what I know now, but I think we can all say that in old age. But the excitement of it was just amazing. What I did learn, and every person should learn this, I learned timing is so important, just so important. We had a mobile ticketing loyalty system based on RFID technology in the 90s. That technology really wasn't in mass use until 2017, right? So that's way ahead of a time. You're not revolutionary if no one's with you in the revolution. That's all I got to say. That's a big advice that I learned. I also had a huge launch with Wallace Theaters. And instead of just focusing in like my MVP and building it out and understanding the consumer needs, I was on to the next client. Mm-hmm. And I really should have just slowed down, understood what worked and didn't work. But, all turns out good in the end. It was pretty exciting. It was pretty fun.
Great. And then Ethan Copeland asks, he says, hey, Mr. Steren, Ethan and Billboards here. I was wondering, how do you manage all of the team that you have? And is Billboards your favorite team? This sounds like a little marketing.
So Billboards is another startup we're working with. Billboards is a mobile application and website for families to make sure that all tasks are being completed. Mm-hmm. So I don't have a favorite startup, especially now, all my students doing now. But in terms of managing teams, I rely on great people, great mentors, and they're the key. So we have monthly meetings with mentors, whatever program I run, whether it's Summer Launch or Bullis or University of Delaware. And the mentors understand this is the framework, that we are no longer CEOs. The students have to go through this experience. They have to learn. I don't call it failing, I call it learning. Every experiment is designed for learning. Every interview is a learning opportunity. That's the key.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things I really appreciated the first day when we were sort of learning how to be mentors in this program, and Shai had this presentation, and Shai is the co-director of the Summer Launch program, and he had this thing as like, he asked a question like, what do you do when the student asks you, what do you think about my idea?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, you're not supposed to tell them you love it. You're not supposed to tell them you hate it. You're supposed to get them to go out into the market and go through the process. And I find that is critical for being a mentor, because when you're an entrepreneur, you get this, like, you drink your own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And your friends and family, either I feel like my family would just, same thing with my family, either you were a doctor or lawyer growing up, and so taking the entrepreneurial path, even though my father himself was an entrepreneur for a part of his life, it was kind of discouraged, like, what are you doing? Like, you have this stable, you have this great degree, you should go out and do this. But the reason that's critical is because you're going out and talking to people, you actually experience reality. You have this, like, they say that Steve Jobs had a reality distortion field around him, and he would just convince everybody of things, even if they were like logically like really against it. And so that kind of pops that bubble early on. As mentors, your job is like, even if you love the idea, and there's companies that I was interacting with, I love the idea. I was like, this is amazing. And and when I hear some of these solutions, I'm like, duh, right. Why didn't I think of that? And your job is just to be as objective and to not like, and you're really going through the process to really coach them and have them build up those skills that they need as entrepreneurs. Because this might not be their first venture. This might be venture number 1 of like 12. Like you're on your 6th company. So I'm going to take another question, and then
can I respond briefly?
Yeah,
about
go ahead.
mentors? So I think the key to having great mentors is what you just said: is love the problem, not the idea.
Mm-hmm.
There is a knowledge base, though, that you and other great mentors have, and that doesn't go away. Right? You have such awesome experience, and we really want to tap into that as much as we can, but it's all within that framework, right? So yes, you can refer someone. Yes, hey, why don't you talk to this person? Have you thought about this? Is okay within the framework? But then they have to come back and validate it with actual customers, whether it's true or false, right? Just because you and I say it is meaningless. They have to go out and validate. We're just here coaches, but they're still playing. And as long as you can keep that as a mentor, this is not our gig, it's theirs. And that's, I know you love doing it, but that's the key of any great mentor.
Yeah. And I think for college students to go out and do these interviews, I remember I was a little intimidated by the customer interviews, even though I've done them myself now that you've kind of been on the block. But in the beginning, I think there was a lot of anxiety around it. And after they did the first few of them, their confidence was just incredible. And they were just running around and talking to people and getting feedback that was shaping the idea for their business. And when you're young, you kind of have a fear of failure, but you can also get back up really kind of quickly and do that. So how did you keep the morale of the students consistent throughout the program? Because there's some people I know that were thinking of, I'm not sure if I'm a good fit for this program, or I don't know if these are sophomores and juniors, and some of them it's in the summer, but some of them have other sort of programs they're involved with, and sometimes they're getting parental pressure. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're at Georgetown University. It's a hefty check they're paying for the tuition, and you got to keep them inspired and motivated. So how do you find was the best way to do that for the Summer Launch program?
So I'm going to take that in 2 parts. One, there's a skill of learning how to interview. And we kind of strengthen the students up. We make them go to Starbucks and get discounts. We make them, if they're flying first class, if they're flying in the back, we make them to try to ask and get first class seats.
Sorry, you're talking about Adam's in the back hearing about how to get discounts. Yes. He's taking notes on this right now.
But we want them to feel uncomfortable, right? Getting used to approaching people is hard, and it's so hard. The second part is, how do students get motivated when they think they have the best idea in the world, and then 3 weeks in they notice that no one thinks it's a great idea. And that's where I think the framework really is helpful, because every week there's a marker, a goal they have to hit. Okay, identify the problem, validate the problem. If you didn't pass that, you have to go back. Existing alternatives. Okay, what are the existing alternatives? Did I hit that goal? If I didn't hit that goal, I have to go back. Prototype. Okay, low fidelity prototype. I build it out. I learn. If I didn't learn what I wanted to learn or enough information, I have to build another prototype and go back. So there's constant goals. I'm a strong believer in setting goals and time boxing things. So yes, you may be disappointed in the results, but if you stick with it and stay in the framework, you'll get there, right? And at the end, there's nothing there, I have to pivot, but man, that's so good because you're constantly moving, you're constantly progressing. And I think where people fail is like there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no goal, right? They're just they're out there asking questions and they're getting rejected and they're in their room crying, right? That's not the point. The point is to understand the framework and discover needs. They're there. Needs are there. There will never, ever be a want for needs. You just have to go discover it. And this framework helps them get it.
And you mentioned something about pivoting. So let's talk about that for a second. Because entrepreneurship is not black and white. It's not success or failure. And sometimes what happens is you're in this gray area. And I know for us as a company, we've pivoted twice since we've been around. And we didn't know it was called pivoting. So how do you're doing these interviews and you're kind of finding that there's something these customers want and your solution kind of helps them, but not like maybe 100%. So the idea here is making a pivot where you're changing something to have a better problem solution fit. So let's talk about that.
Sure. So the qualitative component is super important, right? These interviews are great. What happens though is sometimes they're a little self-serving. That's why I love the prototype and quantitative components, right? Really put in metrics, really hard data to confirm, validate that this is really a problem or not. So I'll give an example. One team last year, they had a Band-Aid on their arm. It was in lieu of going to Sephora or some other makeup place, you put it on your face. They said, that's a pain. Why don't you put it on this Band-Aid type apparatus, and that way you won't get your face dirty with all these different makeups. They went to Sephora, and women were like, hey, man, it's not a big deal. I take a tissue, wipe it off, it's no big deal. But one woman said, you know what? I was just painting my wall, and I would have loved to have that on my wall. They're like, holy cow, let's try that. So they put it on the wall. A week later, a contractor goes into their house and says, you know what? This paint really works well on your Band-Aid or your application. I would have loved to have put that paint in a room I'm painting across the state in Damascus. So then it pivoted to basically a QR code system, a massive database that paint all these different paints where you could be in Barcelona, have the perfect sunlight, whatever it may be, and this paint works perfectly. And then you could dial in and say, okay, that works well for me here. I have the exact same room, but it may be in Paris. I'm going to use that exact same paint. And this massive QR system, database, pretty incredible. From a silly Band-Aid on someone's arm that was for makeup. That's the key to pivoting. But they would never have discovered it without the prototyping, without really listening, is it a need? And that's where I think the value of prototyping is so important.
And imagine like you're a startup and you've got investors and or you're funding it yourself, or if you've got a loan, and you're developing these products and you're not really talking to customers. Imagine if they had spent all this money and they did like a launch, and all of a sudden they found out that the customer that they were trying to solve for, their problem, wasn't the right solution, and they wasted all that money. And so I know it's painful to go through these interviews, and I remember the students were really kind of struggling.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I think the first week is like euphoria, like, oh, we're in this program,
right,
we're ready to go. And then, they start hitting the road and they start talking to customers, and then there's a little bit of a div. You see this little trough of despair, so to speak, and then at the end of it, then they just come right out of it.
Yeah.
And it's a great experience, and it's really inspiring. And then I go back home and I'm like, oh, we got to do this, and doing all these changes at the company. So the pivoting part of it is critical, and it's hard to do this. And during the program, they go through all these different phases of entrepreneurship, and they have this micro program where they're experiencing things that people experience through months or years, and you're doing it in such a short amount of time, and you see the results. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about what happens at the end of summer launch.
So that's a great question. So a lot of these courses, what we do is we design the course with an end in mind. And the end in mind is that every single team will have some sort of MVP. Again, as we discussed earlier, it's a small solution that a customer values, and in return, they get some sort of resource. So now that all these companies, well, the vast majority, will have developed an MVP, They will start receiving, again, resources in return. What's the next step? The next step is growth, right? And that's why Georgetown has a wonderful EIR system. Bullis, we actually implemented an EIR system as well. And we incubate those teams. The winning team at Bullis, at Georgetown, they have entrepreneurs in residence. They will work with these teams all year. I'm still in contact with teams that I worked with 4 or 5 years ago. And it is awesome to be part of that ecosystem. I mean, it is just great that they can tap into people like yourself, other EARs, because we have different skills. I'm pretty decent at the nascent stage. We have other folks that are awesome at the operational stage, and we can hand them off and they can really take off. We also partner with a Georgetown law professor, David Sanders. He's awesome, helps them incorporate, helps them with their IP, and that part of it's cool.
I mean, this program is so unique. As someone who's mentored at different startup incubators and accelerators, and sometimes I feel like what happens is they're strict in terms of getting people into the program. They get into these programs, and then they'll bring them sort of like coaches or mentors, but it's not a coherent program. What I really liked about the Georgetown Summer Launch Program was it was so well structured, and it gave you a very, very good overview of entrepreneurship. So even if your startup didn't succeed, you still got a great crash course in how to build a business. And even, as you graduate, move on to life, you may get that itch again to go ahead and start a company. And you've got a great sort of past performance that you can really kind of rely on. I'm going to take maybe 2 more questions, and then I'm going to start talking about this book.
Let's go.
Which I'm really excited to hear about. So it says, this is Ethan Copeland. Ryan Zamy. Hello, I'm Ryan. During the creation of your startups, what part was most challenging?
So during the startups, I think building the right team is always the biggest challenge, right? We talked about some teams spend a lot of money and they build out products. Other teams, go through our methodology and our framework. You have to be on the same page, and you have to have a diverse skill set. So if you bring someone on who's a marketing and I'm good at marketing, eventually when venture capital comes in, one of us is going to be gone, right? So you really want to have a diverse skill set, and you want to have different voices in the room, right? That there's so much value. If people give a lip service to it, the best companies really do it because they understand the different perspectives will only help the team grow. And that's the key. So building your team is the foremost, most important, and biggest challenging. I've had wonderful marketing directors who build these elaborate MRDs and super smart. And I've had others that weren't so great, and they didn't fit. I'd say culture is the word, but it didn't fit our mentality that we're going to experiment, we're going to test, that things aren't perfect, that we're going to learn from customers, that this isn't about us, right? If we can keep the framework, this is about satisfying needs and building the best solution to satisfy them. And you have to have alignment. You have to have alignment from your board. If your board believes that to spend money, build the solution, then that's not the board that, me and my other students would take on. You got to be on the same page.
And how do you attract this all-star team? Because when you're starting a company, your resources are very thin. And so you've got to be able to attract sometimes developers, sometimes designers, marketers, operations people. How do you do that, especially for a high school and college student?
They have to believe in the dream, right? And it's so cliche, but you have to know why you're doing this. People want to be something where they're part of something great. And if you can sell the greatness of it, the awesomeness of it, and what you're trying to achieve, and you'll be psyched and jazzed at what kind of people you can attract. If it's, hey, I'm out here to make as much money as I can, and screw the people, then chances are you won't attract a great team. And you're not that person. But you also have to know where you're weak, right? I am not an operational expert. I would love to get someone like you who's awesome at those things and bring you on board. And I think being vulnerable as a CEO or founder of the company and know where you're weak is a key also. Hey, I need your help. I'd love to hear your opinion. I'd love for you to take the lead on this situation. Give them an opportunity to grow within your company. Those are the people you want.
I know for Fifth Tribe, one of the ways that we attract talent is actually through internships from high school and college students. And that's one of the pieces of advice I was giving to people in the startup summer launch program. And they're like, I need to volunteer for this. And I was like, have you just tried getting an intern that can get academic credit?
Yeah.
It won't cost you anything and they'll get academic credit. And they're like, I could do that. And they're like, yeah, because it's weird for them because
Yes.
they're in college
Uh-huh.
and they're asking other college students. So like, if they're not technical, I'll say go to the comp sci department. A lot of those students are itching to work on a side project. And especially like your idea is really cool, they'll sign up for it. And then you can figure out sort of how to make that work from a business perspective.
Can I ask you?
Go ahead.
You just taught them the most awesome skill in the world, right? To ask questions. You asked 10,000 questions as a kid. By the time you're a senior in high school, you asked 3 for the entire year, right? That skill that you just gave that kid is invaluable. Psyched, right? I'm going to put you up on my wall and say, please ask questions. That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's one thing that we do. You also mentioned different perspectives. So at Fifth Tribe, one of the things we really value is diversity. And we have designers, developers, and marketers. We have people from different age groups, ethnicities, gender, sexual orientation. And what it does is, and you're right, it sounds so cliche, but when you put all these talented people in a room, those different perspectives, they create amazing things. And it's just almost magical. And so those are things that when you're running a startup, think about those things when you're developing it. And I think you mentioned one of the things about looking for is complementary skills. Like you mentioned, like these are my strengths. Nobody's good at everything. Right. And so, even like Steve Jobs had Steve Wozniak. There was one guy who was stronger technically, one person who was the visionary and the marketing guru. So those are things to look for when you're building a team, is making sure it's a diverse team and you're not just sort of replicating yourself and surrounding yourself by yes people. So that's something I thought that was very important. We're going to take one more question. There's a lot of questions. So so this is Michael Friedlander. Hello, Mr. Steren. Do you suggest starting with a select specific customer segment or a bigger, broader one?
So that's a great question. We actually, first, the TAM has to be big, right? So
what is TAM?
Total area market, right? So that's something that is obviously a concern, but it's kind of counterintuitive. You actually want to sell to the smallest segment that you can, those early adopters. Those folks, you talk about Apple who will wait 2 days before the iPhone even launches without even seeing it. They're going to buy it, right? That's who you want to sell. The great book, Crossing the Chasm. Once you've sold those early adopters, because they'll live with your mistakes, right? They're dying for the solution. They'll be your greatest advocates. They'll tell you what's wrong. They're not shy, but they'll promote it. We still live in referrals. People think you put on a website and you put social media and that's how you market. No, you market through friends, right? You tell me to see a good movie, I'll go watch it.
80% of our business is referrals.
Makes sense, right? And you're not alone. That is actually maybe even a low number. It's very high referral number. It shows what good job you're doing, by the way. It's awesome. But that's the key. So you get that early dose, small segment. They love it. They're jazzed. I want to do it. Then once you figured it out, then you can spread it to more of the mass market. So I think it's that two-pronged approach.
Great. So I'm going to stop here.
Sure.
I think we've talked a lot about summer launch. You talked about this amazing process for startups. How do I learn more about this process that you just talked about?
So there's some great resources. Student Guides to Entrepreneurship is definitely one of them.
So let's talk about that.
Sure.
Because I want to segue into book number 2.
Okay.
So tell us a little about this book and the inspiration behind it. And who's the target audience for that book?
The second book?
The first book.
The first book is Student's Guide to Entrepreneurship. So there are definitely some clear masters in this space, right? Eric Ries, Steve Blank, Ash Maurya, and they're just wonderful sources. What we wanted to do is put in some of what we've learned, some of our experiences, and put it a little more geared towards the students. That's why it's the Student's Guide to Entrepreneurship. So it's designed for MBA students all the way down to high school. But it's really a simple framework that we teach at Summer Launch. And just if they follow the book, they can follow the framework. And one component that we really emphasize is a lot is just belief in yourself, right? We make you go through these hurdles and go to Starbucks and get a discount because you're going to struggle. But we want you to know that with the struggle comes great results. So just stick with it. That's how we're inspired.
Lean Startup is a great book. And I remember reading it and I wish it was a bit more lean.
Yes.
And that's why I remember reading it. I was like, this is a great book, but I felt like it was just really long. And I think it was more of like a stream of consciousness.
Yes.
It was almost it was like a moment where he was realizing something in the collective consciousness about startups and technology. And so when I heard there's this book for students, a book about entrepreneurship, I was like, I gotta get this book. I gotta check this out. And you're on book number 2. So this book, tell us a little bit about it, and when is it coming? What is it about? What is it coming out? Why did you decide to write a second book? One book's not enough for you, so why book number 2?
Well, first of all, I had a great experience Student's Guide to Entrepreneurship, and to your point, we wanted to add a lot of tactics, right? It's not enough to have that stream of consciousness. We wanted real things that students can come away with and use with right away. So that was an important part. The second book, I'm constantly learning. There's wonderful amount of entrepreneurs in the DMV. So what I wanted to do is get stories, and attributes, and understand from entrepreneurs what made them successful. And from these entrepreneurs, I selected 9 of them to pick one attribute that I said, wow, this really is something that I could use with my students. It really just kind of grew organically from there. And it's also dedicated to my mentor, Bullis, Connie, who unfortunately passed away last year from cancer. And she's kind of the god as she tells these stories of entrepreneurs. But and because of her, really, she's awesome. We're going to donate 100% of the net proceeds to the Diana Spencer Foundation, which is a great organization. They provide entrepreneurship education, not just here in the DMV, but all over. So it's a good cause. It's available October 15th on Amazon. Hopefully people will run out and get it. But it provides attributes. Right? What do I need to do to become successful? What do I need to become better at? Can I give you a story from the book?
No, that's exactly why we're here.
Yeah. So one of my favorite stories is Norm Augustine, just a fabulous gentleman. He ended up becoming the CEO of Lockheed Martin, which is a great company. He started as an engineer who wasn't even thinking about going to college, and next thing you know, he's at Princeton, and then he's all the way to become CEO of Lockheed Martin. And they build the space shuttle, parts of the space shuttle, and they're always painted white and black, and they're beautiful things to see. And NASA came to him and said, your fuselage is 2,000 pounds too heavy. And he's like, what do you mean it's 2,000 pounds too heavy? He's like, well, we can't accept this. It's got to be down 2,000 pounds less. So he's out there on the tarmac with his engineers, struggling. How are they going to cut 2,000 pounds from the space shuttle? And all of a sudden, this young engineer walks by and says, why is this thing painted white? And Norm says to the kid, what do you mean? They're always painted white. He says, but why? So Norm, light bulb comes off, because you're right. They run back, do the calculation. The paint was exactly 2,000 pounds. And they're able to send it off to NASA, go to space.
That's amazing.
And so we have startups, we have entrepreneurs who started their own business, and we have established entrepreneurs like Norm. It's just fun.
And stories from Connie. Who is the target audience for that book?
Again, it's students, parents. We would love parents to read it with their kids. We want students to get it. But anyone that is a student of entrepreneurship, why is purpose so important? And that's one of the stories we talk about. But Simon Sinek, everyone's heard it. It's just start with why. It's so important. But I give a story of an entrepreneur who's going through cancer and what he does and what kind of meaning he provides, not just to his customers, but to his employees, and how he inspires them to stay with them during hard times. And if your company doesn't have a purpose as to why you're doing this, you can't keep employees when it's tough, right? You can't inspire customers to come by. You need that purpose. So those are things that are just, I thought were important to tell. And again, if I could put those 9 things together for me, I'd be a better person, but I'd certainly be a better entrepreneur.
I personally benefit from hearing the stories of other entrepreneurs and how they dealt with issues.
Yeah.
It inspires you. It provides you a North Star, and it helps you, being an entrepreneur, sometimes I feel like it's very lonely. It's like sometimes, especially if you're the CEO of a company and every problem is your problem.
Yeah.
And your employees get to go home at 5 o'clock and your mind is racing at night, and you're like, okay, what happens if this happens? And so I love reading stories of other entrepreneurs and learning about them. What is your favorite anecdote from the book or from Connie's life that you'd like to share?
So a couple things. Can I just touch upon your entrepreneur loneliness? For young entrepreneurs, MIT did a great study, and they found that 40% of entrepreneurs are more successful if they have a co-founder. So entrepreneurship is lonely, and great entrepreneurs share not necessarily problems, but share opportunities with the team, right? And it's how you phrase them. So really great entrepreneurs say, hey, I'm struggling with this issue. Can I bring you in and you can make this? So it is painful. There are times that are very lonely, But great ones share it, and great ones learn to say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to grow. Do this, rock it, and you're going to see your star rise. So that's something that I really learned the hard way. So some of the stories. So I love Norm's story. One of my, we'll talk about questions and we'll stay on learning because I want everyone to run out by the book. But it's really funny. Pat Henricks is a great colleague of mine. She's at Georgetown and she was in Paris, had no money. She went there with about a couple $100 in her pocket, and this is all under the category learning through questions. Norm's story and this story as well. And she's at the butcher shop, and she thinks she knows French, and the butcher behind the counter says something about the roast, and instead of asking what does that mean, she had to pretend that she was an expert and says yeah, sure. And what she wanted was a little lamb chop, and what he gave her was the whole rack of lamb, and that was all her money, literally all her money. Goodness. And what she discovered is, you need to ask, right? Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know. And what you'll find is you constantly learn. I learned so much from hanging out with you and other mentors, but by asking them questions, man, my learning curve has gone way up. So that was something I know. And again, it was pretty heartbreaking when Connie passed away, and from her, I learned like how to be structured, how to do a curriculum. But these stories are meant to be fun. And what I did in the book is I provide the science behind it. Why a purpose, people talk about purpose, and then we looked at some studies that validate, there's some science behind companies that have purpose, that do well. And then we had tactics so student employees or student entrepreneurs can really apply that attribute.
And this is a question about process.
Sure.
How do you do this? How long did it take you to write this book? And I know I've seen you as an entrepreneur in residence, and I've seen you at summer launch. It's you're teaching at University of Delaware, and you're teaching at Bullis High School. How did you find the time to write a book?
So, thank you for asking. Time management and productivity is so important. And there's a concept called micro habits. And what I did is every morning I knew I was going to write 200 words, a very low bar. And I always crush it. Did 1,000, 5,000 words. But every day in those days, man, I just barely made 200. But I knew I had to write 200 words every day. The process took me a year and a half, but most of that process was interviewing entrepreneurs. I interviewed close to 100. I only put 9 in the book. And I learned so much. And I really want to give credit to all those entrepreneurs. I wish I could have put more. But I like simple and I like short. So I actually trimmed many, many pages of this book. And I got to thank Tammy Levy, who's the co-author and editor of this book, for really just cutting. Because it's not meant to be a large S book. It's meant to be simple, 9 easy attributes that we can follow. And this is the tactic to apply. Einstein's greatest theory of simplicity, of genius, right? He has 5 levels of genius. His highest level of genius is simplicity. If it's good enough for Einstein, it's good enough for me. That's the way I look at it.
And this is a question that maybe the younger viewers won't necessarily care about right now, but you're married and you have kids. How do you find time? The work-life balance question.
So very carefully, right? I love my wife and love the boys. And actually, I went through 10 years where I wasn't home for dinner, and I struggled, and I worked every day, all day. And what I found is I was very inefficient. And so again, I thank mentors for teaching me how to be more productive, how to balance times, how not to disrupt yourself. So I have a book. I'll be happy to show you my workbook offline, but just like I set 3 basic goals for the month. Then I put a weekly schedule and then a daily schedule. And every day I have to do something towards those goals. And every half hour I time block, right? There's only one thing in that time block, and that's it. I don't scroll through email all day. I don't look at my notifications. I turn them off. If my focus is a half hour to meet Joe Smith, then that's my focus. Everything else is off. And I also put down the page, the concept of the most important thing. What is your most important thing that you are going to achieve today? Always hit that. And man, I'm jazzed. I said, this day may have sucked, but I gave myself a kiss. Whatever it is, that's the most important thing. And you have to decide what's your most important thing.
One thing that I found helpful was this year, we had some issues with aftercare.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife is a teacher. So we had to switch our schedule around. And before, I was able to go in the mornings early, get to work, be like the first person in the office,
Mm-hmm.
get there like around 7 o'clock, just, have 2 hours to myself before everybody else kind of comes in. But this is a real challenge for me.
Yeah.
Because now I got to drop my kids off at school. And I found out that the workaround that I do is that I wake up from 6 to 8, I'm doing my work. And the kids' school is like 5 minutes from where we live, and I can just drop them off. And what's incredible is that at first I was a bit worried because I was breaking up my workflow. So, in the beginning I was a bit concerned. I'm like, I got to go in a little bit later than I usually want to, and I'm not going to be able to make up that time. But I actually find it's actually more helpful productivity-wise because I have about 2 hours, and I can do like 1 to 2 tasks. And when I woke up in the morning, I was like, what task is going to 10x my company?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I do.
Love that.
So when I go to work, even though I'm driving through traffic, my kids forgetting the lunch, one's forgetting the shoe, you gotta, and you're running around. When I get to the office, I feel great because, like you mentioned, like you've done that one thing, and you're just like, okay, great. No matter what else falls apart, I got this one thing off my list, and that's how I felt was really. It was pure circumstance, but having those 2 hours in the morning myself, where I'm only doing that, I don't answer emails, I'm not looking at my phone. My phone's upstairs. But I'm like, the question, like, how do I 10x my company? And that is, I thought was really helpful to have 2 hours of like uninterrupted time. But it took me a while to get to that point. So go ahead.
I love that 10x question, right? You're maximizing what's important.
Mm-hmm.
And I do actually get up a half hour early, and I do a rubric of meditation, affirmations, visualizations, and reading, and things that are just for me that get me excited for the day. And I love how you said, okay, what am I going to 10x? What's the most productive thing? If you're like me, you're very productive in the morning, kind of scales down at the end. But that's so great that you're cognizant of that. And, again, next year to teach the students that is awesome.
Yeah, I found for me that there's a concept of like time management. And I think it's also this concept of energy management, which just sounds like very like new age. But what I mean by energy management is that in the morning when I wake up and I've taken a shower and I've got my coffee, my focus is so intense that what I can do in 2 hours is better than if I'm at work for 10 hours because one interruptions. But even when you're at the end of the day or throughout the day, you're getting interrupted. There's things that you have to put fires out for. But even then, like your energy level is just not the same. If after you eat lunch, we try to go for walks around here. It's beautiful here in Crystal City, and we go for walks and we get our energy level up. And we tell people it's okay, to get up and walk, and don't be ashamed to like try to boost your focus. Don't just sit at your desk all day. Just making sure that when you're working, it's not about how long you're working, it's how hard you're working and how productive you are. And so I find that me waking up early in the morning and doing that one task, like I feel great. And then I can go to work and give my team the attention they deserve. Because I always feel like I'm failing them as a leader. Like, I need people to see the time to do this. And part of it is like my job is to build systems and hand it off to people. But even those systems don't always function, and you got to step in and give guidance. And and you always just feel like, oh man, I need to give my attention to my family at home, my family at work. And so it's good. It balances out.
But I love how you give walks. Right? Because people think that most of all great creativity comes from brainstorming, whatever it may be. Only 16% come out of those design thinking techniques. 84% means, you're in the shower, you come up with this great idea, you're for a walk. Your mind needs time to collect and think it through. And when you do that, when you go through a walk, put in the tunes, whatever it may be, your subconscious mind is working on those ideas. So that is so cool. You do that.
Thank you.
I actually think schools should do that. I think schools should have learning walks where you just go for a walk for 20 minutes, whatever it may be. Give your mind a chance to just reflect on what you've been studying. I think it's cool.
And those little breaks is where you have these breakouts, and you just mentioned like you're taking a shower and you have this thought, and we encourage that. And there's like bike trails here. Sometimes we go on bike rides and we go on hikes and stuff, and it really gets the team bonding really kind of strong. All right, I'm gonna switch over to some questions, and there's a lot of questions. I don't know if we're gonna get to all of them. But one question is from Will Everett. What is the best way to ensure a quality interview with the consumer? What are the best questions to ask?
So that's a great question. Best questions are open-ended, right? They listen to stories. They are based on past behavior, those kind of things. But anything designed for learning, right? Leading questions are obviously out. Where were you on the night of December 5th is not the best way. But anything to really understand the needs. And you want to look for certain things. You want to look for the consumer habits, right? We're not going to break their habits. But what triggered that purchase in the past? is a good indicia what will trigger purchases in the future. Well, I shop for cars every 3 years. Third year comes, I hit that person. I'm a salesperson. I hit them back, right? Those kind of things are so valuable. Learning what their triggers are, what their patterns, how they reward themselves, what they considered. My kids went to Georgetown. They considered Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, Duke. Okay, it gives me a semblance of what kind of money I'm going to spend, what kind of school I'm looking for. It's a really nice indicia what they're doing. And then finally, this is so key. What are they trying to achieve, right? Why, jobs to be done theory is a great theory. Why are they hiring your solution? What are they really trying to accomplish is the key.
Great. I remember for one thing for us at Fifth Tribe, you mentioned leading questions. I actually don't want to, I think that's actually like, if there's one takeaway from doing customer interviews, like don't leading questions. Right. So when Fifth Tribe first started, we built this sort of tool that does like iPad sales applications, and it was great. We were talking to investors at the time, two VCs, and they were saying that you guys need to focus on data and analytics because that's where the money is. And these were VCs, so we assumed like, they were successful entrepreneurs. One was like a medical, sort of like VC. The other one was more in software development, and they both are. I think they were on their third or fourth company at that time, and we took their advice very seriously because they're VCs, right? And they're looking for companies to invest in. So we were like, what they're saying makes sense. And we were doing our customer interviews. We basically asked leading questions. We'd be like, we're building this tool. What do you think if it had data? Right. I'd love to have data on there. Oh, well, great. And then, so this is why it's important, because it wasn't that we just did the customer interviews, we asked leading questions. We got the deal, right? So we closed all these customers. And this is important because for us, it was an S curve where we were getting, brands. We got like Oxfam and Peace Corps and Kaiser Permanente, and these are reputable brands. Yeah. And they loved the app, and they were talking about the data, and then it was just flat, right? So this is what happened was we kind of got through our friends and family network, and then we were dealing with the real world, and didn't really start. We started getting harder and harder to close those deals, and then after a while, we were like, let's talk to our customers and ask them like, what did you think about it? And we started to do real sort of not proper customer interviews, but a little bit better than asking leading questions. And then they would tell us like, we love the app. It was great. It was a great experience working with you guys. But, and then I asked them like, whatever happened with the data? Did you guys ever use it? No. And we were like, what? And then we would log in and realize like not a single client of ours used it. And the challenge was we ourselves weren't using it to track our customers' behavior, to show that we weren't even using the analytics. Yep. And so that was insightful because what had happened was we asked leading questions. We asked the question that we wanted to hear, which was, yes, they wanted data, and we didn't look at their behavior. We weren't looking at, are they using data even? I mean, what platforms are they using in their other parts of their businesses or nonprofits or whatever to in terms of making decisions? And if that wasn't part of their organizational culture, why would it change for an iPad application? And then the other thing that happened was that came out of that was great, was that we pivoted because we got feedback from customers saying, hey, we love the app, we love the design, the interactivity. Do you guys build websites? And so then we were like, wait a minute, that's how we pivoted from a product to a service company. And our customers didn't change, but we just changed the solution to their problem. And we created a solution first to a problem that didn't exist. And then we created a solution to a problem that they already had that we didn't know about. So that's important, not to ask leading questions and not to basically hear what you want to hear. I'm going to go ahead and ask, let's see who else we got. So this is from Al-Batul Al-Tuguri. Hey, Mr. Steren, this is Al-Batul. And I was wondering, what made you know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur and later a teacher?
So what I wanted to be, I've always been an entrepreneur. I designed a U-turn signal. We wanted to do espressos in the States. We wanted to build a McDonald's in Buenos Aires. I just love entrepreneurship. I had a landscaping company as a kid. That part of it was important. We came from immigrant families, and for them, it's important to get a grad school. And I'm always thankful that they push us that way because it really gave me a good way to think. But I love entrepreneurship. I love it. And entrepreneurship has been so great to me and my family that when the moment came that we sold our last company, we wanted to do something that could really have an impact. And we think we are. We think not just myself, but this great Georgetown community, this great Bullis community, this other great entrepreneurs in this area. We're thinking we're helping people not just become employable, not just building companies, but this mindset, right? This mindset that I can accomplish anything, right? And that is so valuable that if I really discover unmet needs, I'm onto something. And that part of it's cool. I mean, I tell these people, you're doing the hardest thing in the world. You're creating something out of nothing that no one's ever heard of by people that no one's ever heard of, right? And it's fun, and they jazz and they dig it and they do so well. And before you know it, they got thousands of customers. These kids, right? Mm-hmm. Not kids, but they're college kids, MBAs, high school students. They're building, right? So much more than we ever, at least I did as a kid. So that part of it's just awesome.
I feel like this is a Dead Poet Society moment, and your students, like, I'm getting so amped just hearing you. Like, I really wish you were one of my teachers at high school or college. It's like, I feel like the students are incredibly lucky to have you as a teacher. That. Great. Let's see through some more questions. So this is Alex, and he says, "Hi, Mr. Steren. It is Alex Benaim, and I was wondering, how do you measure success in a startup?"
That's a great question. All things need to be designed through metrics, mm-hmm. right? It's so important. Just the learning you got that people weren't using the data, right? If you weren't tracking that metric, then you would have never known, and you would never have the ability to pivot. So there's certain things, right? Every company should have the ability to 10x through their product market fit phase or stage of the company. So once you have the MVP, once you have paying customers, or you're getting some sort of resource, whether data, whatever it may be, and if you can't 10x that growth, that's problematic, right? And that's when you know that your growth strategy does not work. There's a great book by Tony Ulrich, and he's got this growth strategy metric, and it talks about different strategies that you can implement, whether it's the need is oversubscribed or undersubscribed, whatever it may be. But you have to come up with a strategy to 10x your company. And again, if you're not 10xing your company, A, you're not investable, but B, why is that stagnant? And you measure that, right? We always measure that. I always also look at the pirate metric by McClure, right? It talks about acquisition. R is really the acronym, but it's, acquisition, is it activated customers, revenue, retention, and then finally referral. Mm-hmm. And as they go through that funnel, as you're measuring every piece of that, are you seeing growth? Mm-hmm. And if the last one is growth.
Let me just piggyback off that. Why is 10x growth important?
So 10x growth because you're creating something from nothing. You have that initial, and you found that out pretty quickly. You'll have the early adopters, those that really love your product. If you can't cross the chasm to mainstream, you'll never be a valuable company. You'll be a niche. You'll be a hobby for these early adopters, and they'll love you. Mm-hmm. But if you can't cross it where you can be more marketable to many more people, make it more mainstream, again, you'll just be a niche product.
It's not just about the investors, because when you talk about 10xing, sometimes people are thinking like, oh, this is about me giving the ROI to the investor, which is important, but you're talking about the survival of the business itself.
Correct.
Which you can't be slightly better than the next person in line. You have to be 10 times better than the next person in line and create such traction that nobody can kind of catch up with you. It's a competitive advantage.
Love that.
Not just getting my investor money in his pocket, which is still very important, but getting that competitive advantage that you're so far ahead that no one even comes close.
I love it. You're building a brand, you're building barriers by doing that. Not only that, by 10xing the product, you are showing growth to the consumers, to the investors, but the consumers, they'll feel a sense of comfort, right? No one said, no, well, it's not just Mark using this. I see that Joe's also using it. Henry, Sally, Jane, it's becoming that effect, that referral effect that you really want to measure. That's when you're onto something really cool. So it's pretty fun.
Awesome. I think we're kind of sort of at the end. Okay, I'm going to take a question from Evan. Let me just go through these questions real quick. Okay. So some of these questions are kind of similar about, the best startup and the best business, or the worst startup and the worst business. I think we'll take two more questions, and then we'll call it a night. It's getting late over here too. So Jordan asks, hey, Mr. Steren, what are some key signs that your startup isn't as great as you thought it was? And how do you bounce back from failure?
Cool. That's a great question. So you'll know by measuring, right? If the feedback is saying, this is kind of interesting, but call me in a couple months, right? That feedback, that qualitative component is very important. And we discuss different levels of a headache. If it's not a migraine headache, then you pivot to a problem that is a migraine headache. Don't go to step B if they're not very excited about their problem, right? And that's when you know. But it's not failure, right? It's learning. We're learning what the problem is. And if you couch it that way, you'll never fail. You're just constantly learning. You're constantly going down the line. And it's okay to say what I thought I was is very different from what I end up being. In fact, you probably didn't go through the process correctly if you didn't go through that. I haven't met one entrepreneur that had the perfect solution, figured out the exact problem from day one. I just don't know any. I'm sure they're out there, but every single, I've mentored probably over 150 entrepreneurs just in this area, more students than that. I don't know anyone that's gone through that process and not pivoted.
All right. I think it's Albert Einstein. I'm not sure, don't quote me on this, but no, actually it was Charles Darwin who said it's not how strong a species is, it's not how smart it is, it's its ability to adapt. It's like evolution. And so you may have the best technology, you may have all this funding, but if you're not solving a problem for a customer, you're not going to survive. And this will be our last question. There's still more questions coming in. Evan Wall, who we both know.
Yes,
he's
wonderful
the CEO
student
and founder of Shift Marketing. Evan, giving you a shout out. He's a Georgetown summer launch participant, and he did a great job. And Evan's asking a very specific question. He says, ask Marc how he mind maps his books. I've been reading a lot lately, and I want to maximize retention.
Love it. So, Evan, I'm jazzed that you're reading a lot. I read anywhere from 100 to 150.
I got a great book for you, Evan, to read. It's coming up.
Yep, October 15th.
I'm going to end on this question, so it's a great segue.
So what's scary is a lot of people don't know how to learn, right? We don't know how to stretch our brains to really understand. So there's really two books I want you to read. One is called Mind Shift. It's about a professor, Barbara Oakley. She is brilliant. She's got the most watched MOOC actually in the world, learning how to learn. And another is called Make It Stick. And these are two books on learning and how to learn. So whenever you read a book or listen to a book, it's key to write down every chapter afterwards and just write down the learning in your own words. That's really the key. And there's one other component, it's called spatial learning. In other words, rote learning is not the way to learn. You don't completely do it over and over and over again. That's actually not the way to learn. The way to learn is take something, try it, and then 2 or 3 days later, come back. And that gives your brain time to grow. And what I do is I form mind maps. Mind maps are merely trees. They can be circles. And I'll put a concept in the middle, and I'll try to branch out as many concepts as I can and try to connect them. And then what I really like to do is try to connect them to other books I've read in the past and see how these concepts overlapped. It is a great way to recall. I still remember books that I read, again, 4 or 5 years ago. Really, it's kind of on the top of my mind because the way I organize those thoughts, I can kind of go and retrieve them pretty easily. I think of the mind map. Another great book, as I'm pushing books, Remember It. It talks about memory palaces and how to remember things. I think it's a nice parlor trick if you're at a party and you want to remember someone's name.
And if you're looking for a book to mind map,
yes,
we've got Stories from Connie, the Little Book of Entrepreneurs' Attributes by Professor Marc Steren, and it comes out October 15th.
Yes.
And it's available on Kindle, Amazon. Can you pre-order it?
Yeah, you can pre-order it on October 3rd, but I'm really hoping people go to buy it on October 15th from 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. That's the big rush. And I'm just really thankful for all the entrepreneurs who really just were open and told me their stories. And some of these are great stories.
Yeah, thank you, Marc, for coming on.
My pleasure.
My apologies for if I didn't get to everybody's questions. Maybe what we could do is we can email them to you and we can get them in writing. Marc, thank you for coming on to the Campfire YouTube Live Q&A. I think this is a great program. I learned a lot, and I remember listening to your talks at Summer Launch Program, and I was like, this guy gets it, and the world needs to hear it. And I kept telling people it's the gospel of Marc. So I was saying, like, I got to get this guy out here because it was so unique. It was so incredible. And entrepreneurs it's an invaluable resource for anybody looking to create a startup. If you're in high school, in college, I don't even think it's just for high school and college students, to be honest. I think any entrepreneur of any age could benefit from your writings. And so I look forward to getting a copy of the book. I'm going to order it on October 3rd.
Great.
2 more days. I love to pre-order books on Kindle. I'm going to download it,
Awesome.
and I'm going to try this mind mapping thing. I may ask you some questions about that. And thank you all to all of our viewers for listening on our first episode of the Campfire podcast. I'm Karim Zaman. Please subscribe at the when you see the button. And that's it for tonight. Thank you all for having us.
Thanks for having me.